Welcome to the Emotional Balance Sheet Podcast, your guide to help you manage life, money, and multiples. Each episode, host Paul Fenner, Tama Capital's president and founder, and the proud parent of 4 amazing children, including 1 set of triplets, will provide insights on successfully sustaining an active lifestyle, career, and family through comprehensive wealth management strategies, financial education, and lifestyle planning, specific to parents raising twins, triplets, and more. Learn more, subscribe to the show, or connect with Paul at tamacapital.com.
This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be relied upon for investment decisions. Clients of TAMA may retain positions in the securities discussed in this podcast.
Are you willing to do the work and focus on someone besides yourself? Are you willing to be a better person for it? These are the same questions that drive Cathy Adams, a self-awareness expert, podcast host, and author focused on helping parents and empowering families. Cathy is a licensed clinical social worker, certified parent coach, certified elementary school teacher, certified yoga teacher, and teaches in the sociology department at Dominican University and Elmhurst College. 11 years ago, Cathy and her husband Todd launched Zen Parenting Radio, a podcast that helps expand compassion through the lens of a spiritual and emotional mom and a logical and practical dad. Cathy's most recent book, Zen Parenting, dives into the 7 chakras and how they intertwine with our lives as parents. Cathy explains that her journey as a new mom was not quite how she originally envisioned it, which helped lead to several life transitions that led her into therapy and parental coaching. As Cathy pointed out during our conversation, if it's hysterical, it's historical, a reference used in recovery programs that identify the root cause of an issue is always a few layers deep and not simply on the surface. We can't always plan for what's next as parents. What is possible is our unlimited capacity for compassion and caring for ourselves and our children. Please enjoy my conversation with Cathy Adams. So Cathy Adams, welcome to the Emotional Balance Sheet Podcast.
Thank you, Paul. I'm really excited to be here.
And you look amazing, even though our audience, who's our audio listeners, can't see us. You look great for having COVID. We had this scheduled, and you had no voice, and I know you felt horrible because it was like a last minute thing. But I am so glad that you were feeling healthy and somewhat back to normal, you said.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it was literally the day before. Like I was kind of pushing it away. Like, no, this isn't COVID. I'm fine. And then my voice literally went away right before we were supposed to record. So I am now 2 or 3 weeks post. I'm thank you. I feel so much better. But as we were just talking before we started, it's quite a journey.
Yeah, and that was one of the things that we talked about is how it affects everybody so different, even within families. Because like everybody, you said in your family got it. I'm a family of 6. Most of the audience knows I have a set of triplets plus 1. And my wife, Teresa, got it. My daughter, Madison, got it. The other 4 of us, same room, in the same week. We're all together and we didn't get it. So
I know it's funny because I think once you have it, or when you're, trying to avoid it, or once you've been exposed, and we've all been in one of those categories, you do all this reading. So you can be like, okay, I need to be clear. And what you recognize, and we've been doing this for 2 years now, 2.5 years, is there are no answers. Right. So it's unpredictable. It's uncertain. Just like you said, you can be in the same room and not get it. For me, I have no idea where, we don't know. Mm-hmm. So it's like, there's no way to know and how people are affected by it. And then the other thing, Paul, that's crazy is it was less about the illness itself and more about the disconnection from people for a long period of time. Yeah. To isolate, not touch them, wear masks, not like there's such a sense of like, I can't connect with people. It felt like the olden days of 2020.
Yeah. I mean, I was just going to say that had to take you back. And that's probably not a journey you wanted to go back on.
I didn't. And I now have, like I said, I had avoided it all those years, and I now have a more compassionate. I was compassionate before, but now I really understand when someone gets it, it's like 10 days of, you have to figure out how to get away from people, and some people feel better before then, but it's this whole process of making sure you don't expose others. It's just, again, it's just a journey. And when you're through it, you're just like, wow, okay. I just said to you, I'm just glad I have a little time, who knows how much time, but where I'm not going to get it so I can be a little more free, but we'll see how long that lasts. I hope as much time as I can get.
Well, I am so excited about having you on because we're going to talk about so many things that are exciting in your realm right now. You launched a new book. You and your husband, Todd, have this amazing podcast of your own called Zen Parenting. And so we're going to get into a lot of this. And I think our audience is really going to be impressed with your background. So why don't we start there? Give our audience background or info on who you are, what you do, because you have a really interesting background as a licensed therapist, which
yes,
I love having people like you on the show.
Yeah. Well, it started, I was not to go back too far here. I just turned 50. So, I don't need to tell you every year, but I started out as an elementary school teacher and then realized that I wanted to go back to become a social worker, a clinical social worker, because I was talking to my students about their emotional well-being all the time anyway. Wasn't that interested in reading and math. I was like, I just want to, be supportive of kids. I worked at a children's hospital here in Chicago that's now called Lurie Children's Hospital, used to be called Children's Memorial. And I worked in, the psychiatry department, inpatient, partial hospitalization, helping families, children, teenagers. And then once I had my own kids, and I have 3 daughters, now 19, 17, and 14, I went into a slightly different direction where I started doing parent coaching. So instead of doing like high crisis type of situations that I was doing at the hospital, I started focusing more on parents' everyday needs. How do I get my kid to sleep? How do I take care of myself? How do I deal with my relationship? So coaching is just a little bit different than therapy. There's we've had years and years of differentiating between the two. I would say I bring both into my work. I bring my therapeutic awareness, but also my coaching kind of mentality. And then I also, since that time, I have a clinical practice. Obviously, I work with people, but Todd and I started Zen Parenting Radio 11 years ago, which is why it's called Zen Parenting Radio, because nobody knew what a podcast was.
Paul, you're one of the original OGs, what we call that, original gangsters, you and Todd.
So much so that we thought like a radio station would buy our show. Like that's how naive, right? But we still, we kick it back and call it Zen Parenting Radio still. And we have been doing that together. And when we started, Todd was not, I was telling you before that he's a lot like you, the things he was interested in. He's a salesman. He's been there for his whole career. Like since he was 22 years old, he's into real estate. He loves financial planning, but really what he loves are the things you love too. Like he wants to talk about relationship. He wants to talk about parenting. He wants to talk about connection, especially with men, because that's not very common.
Right.
So we have this show where we talk about all those things and we kind of, bring in a lot of pop culture. We bring in a lot of spirituality. We bring in a lot of like Western understanding, the medical model of, therapeutic awareness. And then I'm a writer and I've written a few books, but my recent book is called Zen Parenting. I kind of tried to bring together everything that we talk about on the show, which is not easy because it's been 11 years,
right.
And put it together in a way where people could be like, okay, what are the things that if I want to have a connective relationship, take care of myself, feel, have a sense of peace. How do I do that? So that's what my book is about.
So we're going to get into the details of that. But one of the interesting things you pointed out was this transition, which we talk about a lot on this show, and how most people, I think, really underestimate the amount and brevity of life transitions you actually go through.
Yeah.
And so I just wrote this down: teacher to therapist to parenting coach.
Yeah.
How did I can see going from teacher to therapist, but walk us through, like, how did you go from therapist to parenting coach? And like, what was that like? And how did you actually do it? Like, did you have to go back and get certified or go that route?
What happened is I had my first daughter. And like I said, I was still working as a therapist and a clinical educator at the hospital. And I realized that if I was going to be with her, like focus on her needs. Because here's another thing. Talk about transitions. Becoming a parent, you don't even know what that means until it happens, right?
That's right.
So
there's no book or podcast or conversation that's gonna prep you for that.
I know. I love reading my journal from that time where I'm like, and I'm going to still go to live shows and see my favorite bands. And I'm going to still, go out with my friends and have her in the Bjorn. Like I had so many ideas of what parenting would look like. One of them being I'm going to keep working full time. Right. And what I decided to do was not do that. After some time, I was like, I can't. And this is just for me, by the way, because I work with a lot of moms who are able to work full time and that's what fills them up. So I have to be very clear that this was my situation. I was at work with other people's children focusing on a lot of crisis. And I realized that that was where my energy was going. And then when I was with my own daughter, I didn't have it. So I made a choice to be at home. And I actually spent a little time at home, Paul, like probably about 6 months where I didn't do anything because I was parenting the whole time. What I mean is in my career. So parenting was pulling enough out of me. A lot of transitions were occurring where I was just figuring out how to be a new mom. And that was when I realized I still want to help people. I still want to talk to people, but I can't. And this is, again, this talk about an OG thing. I was like, I really don't know how to do it and be with my kid too. And I found this program. It's actually based out of Seattle Pacific University, and it was called the Parent Coaching Institute. And, it's one of those random Google searches where I was just like, oh, what is this? And then kind of looked into it and their curriculum. And their curriculum not only was interesting to me from the therapeutic model that I'd gone through for clinical social work, but it also incorporated a lot of things about, self-awareness or what personal growth, things that I was interested in on my own. I was always into self-help and it's in many forms. And so I went to school. I went back to school. I got my coaching certification, I think in about 2 years. And then that's when things started being on the phone. So I remember I was like, when I first started learning about coaching, I'm like, how am I going to coach someone if I can't see their body language? Because that's a big part of being a therapist. Mm-hmm. But they're like, no, it works on the phone. You just have to practice. And it did. Like I had wonderful interactions with my clients on the phone. And so I could work with people no matter where they lived, the geography didn't matter. And so it became this really wonderful, while I was home with my girls, I could still have time where I could work with people and support them in their parenting. And it kind of fit where my life was in that moment.
So let me go back and ask, how did you and Todd actually start Zen Parenting then?
Yeah. So I actually, my first book came out and it was called The Self-Aware Parent. And it was just basically, I wrote it more for my clients and people that I knew because I was doing a lot of group work and I wanted people to have something that they could take home with them. But it ended up having a bit of a life. And I did an interview with somebody who wanted to talk to me about it. And they had a podcast. And when I say an interview with someone, I didn't even know I was on a podcast. I was just like, oh, you want to, interview me? Okay, here's a microphone. But they're like, you should start a podcast. They had a production company. So they're like, come work with us and you should do a podcast. And I thought that was really interesting because my husband and I we've had the show for a long time. So some people are interested in talking or listening to us, but we talk in depth all the time. Like we drive our kids crazy where they'll be like, can you guys stop? Like, can we get like a word in here? Because we always have all these details we want to relate to each other. So when she said you should do a podcast, she said, but find someone to do it with, then you can have like a back and forth. And I signed up my husband immediately. I was like, my husband will do it with me. Now he didn't know that. I literally walked upstairs. I was like, listen, there's this thing. And I tried to downplay it. But he was all in. Like he was more than a trooper. He was interested. He was like, okay. So we started and, it's like everything grew under our feet. And what I mean by that is because there weren't a lot of platforms. I mean, there was iTunes, but I remember I had burned a few CDs so my mom could listen to it. I am so aging myself right now. But it took off because I think the things we talked about at the time, they were unique. I think they've become a little more mainstream, but we talked about the merging of, understanding therapeutic practices when it comes to our kids or what discipline really is and self-care and self-compassion. And it was a much more I think, accessible way of looking at parenting rather than be super like rule-based or, focusing on punitive measures or punishment. It was more about how do you connect with your kid? How do you feel good about your family? And it took hold, and it's been, we're still here.
Yeah.
Still
you and Todd starting this has been, I can't even imagine all the stories that you could share and tell in 11 years of doing this. But obviously the two of you were really ahead of the curve, because to your point, a lot of this is more mainstream, and we were talking about this before we hit record, and I know I've mentioned this on the show before. It's like, I have this secret, and I don't know if people really realize it or not, but when I started the show almost 2 years ago, it was really for me selfishly to figure out some of the answers that I was searching for, and to be able to talk to experts in fields such as yourself that, other people I think would find interesting. And the fact that I was dealing with these issues with not only my own family personally, but all these, now 65 plus families that I work with at TAMA, and the varying degrees of where everybody's at. I have people that have young children. I have people that are now widowed. I have people that are like you and I that, I still have younger kids. Yours are a little bit older, although we're close to the same age.
Yeah.
But everybody's at different spots in their lives. But we've already said this once. And if this was a drinking show, we do shots every time we say life transitions. Totally. I know. And we'll have many more to do, because that kind of, and you know what, my secret is the same as your secret. That's why I do everything I do, is I'm interested in it personally. I think it's the, when Todd and I come down, I'm actually in the podcast studio right now. When we come down and do a podcast, we're not just creating a podcast for everybody else. We're having a really important conversation. And one of the things that we made very clear is that the show is not about our kids. We're not talking about my kid did this, and it's not their personal lives have not been for display for the last 11 years. We talk about us, how we reacted to something, and what, something occurred and how we didn't respond the best way, or what we could have done better. Or we do a million shows that are just about, like the show that posted today. I mean, literally, we just talked about the first noble truth in Buddhism and what it means about what the truth of suffering and what life is suffering means, and how do we relate to that? So our big secret, Paul, is that our show is not about parenting. It's about us. And then that's trickles into parenting, because everything begins with us. That is well said. So speaking of secrets, what's the secret behind starting or to writing this book that you just got out here in the spring, or depends on where you live, I guess late winter, early spring. Zen Parenting. One of the questions that I wanted to ask is to have you walk us through the 7 chakras that you say, that you identify in your new book. And for those that don't know, and I didn't know what this was either, I had to look it up, but what's a chakra?
I love it. So the book is actually a fun blend of everything I love. Okay. Because the intention of the book is to be very accessible. I don't want it to be esoteric. I don't want it to be, difficult for someone to access some wisdom from it. But it also is a blend of all the things. Like for people who listen to the show, this will make a lot of sense. Zen parenting, or using the chakras in Zen parenting, is about understanding ourselves and our energy. So one of the things I also am that I didn't tell you is I'm a yoga teacher. So I focus a lot on understanding body energies, understanding body awareness. And I don't mean to stay fit. I mean to be able to hear the messages from our body. Many of us in the world walk around as floating heads that we think anything we think is what we need to do. And we don't listen to the wisdom of our body. So what the chakras are they're energy centers in the body, and they're not something that you can see on an MRI. They're more of like anybody who's done Reiki or yoga or Ayurvedic medicine. That's what you're working with, is you're working with the energy centers in the body. And there's 7 of them, and all of them have a specific purpose or reason. And they all tend to build on each other, but they're not completely linear, because you could be focusing on, something in the heart chakra and still need to work on chakra 1, which is the feeling of belonging and having a sense of grounding. So not everything is perfectly like, oh, you get to the 7th chakra and you're all good. Sometimes you're going back and forth. There's a lot of like mix and match, if you will. But why I use them is because that's how I understand myself. Like I feel, the energy centers all have different information, and I can make it very grounded. Like, chakra 1 is just about a sense of belonging. Chakra 2 is about our sense of creativity, and chakra 3 is about gut instincts, right? Everybody knows, like in your stomach, like if you feel like something's good. Chakra 4 is your heart center and your feelings of love, but also grief. Your grief lives here too. Chakra 5 is your ability to speak what you feel and know. And that in itself, if you're not in alignment in these other areas, it's very difficult to speak what you know. Like, it's very hard to have a podcast if you don't have a point of view, right?
Right.
And then chakra 6 is a more like intuitive, like what's right for me. It's called the third eye center. And chakra 7 is our connection to other people. So while it can sound really like, oh, like, first of all, I'm not an expert on chakras either. I mean, I practice them and I understand them, but there's much better books about chakras overall. But I use the structure to talk about all those aspects of self, so we could not only like dive into our own selves and say, am I paying attention to these aspects of myself, but also support our kids in understanding those aspects of themselves. Like, imagine with a kid who's having a hard time making a decision. And this is just like a really simple thing you can do, but asking them, put your hand on your heart, close your eyes. What feels right to you? Helping them learn to trust themselves. A sense of belonging is all about like having your feet on the ground, metaphorically and literally, taking a walk, or having your feet on the ground means making a decision. Everything has all these layers of understanding, but sometimes bringing them together, like chakras became the structure or scaffolding to talk about a lot of different things. So that's, so for the people who are way into spirituality or into body work, they may go one direction, but like for you, you were like, I didn't even know what these were. You can just look at them through the lens of, oh, heart center is like developing empathy. 5th chakra is more about communication. Like, it can be more literal.
So how do you, like, what age or ages do you start potentially introducing this to kids? If parents want to go, start trying to utilize some of these things that you're bringing up, because I think of where I'm at right now with, my triplets are going to be 12 in December. Mackenzie, our plus one, will be 10 in October.
You're in the heart of it.
They're going through massive changes right now. It's really hard. I mean, I have my own therapist that I see every 2 weeks. Yes,
me too. Are you kidding me? Of course we do.
And she's been a godsend. And it's only until the last couple months that we've kind of figured out some triggers to where, rather than me exploding on my kids, being aware and taking that step back. And when I say taking a step back, I mean physically. Like, I have to do something physically to get myself out of that mental spot where I don't want to be, because I don't want to be yelling at my kids. My kids don't want me yelling at them either. But that's been my MO for a long time, and I'm trying to break it.
Yeah. Well, and what's so interesting is you will start to, and you may already be doing this in your therapeutic work, but pay close attention to the things that really do frustrate you, because your kids are doing things during the day that may frustrate a different parent, but they don't frustrate you. Like, this can often happen, in couplehood where, one person is really freaked out about something and you're not, and the other person is really freaked about something the other person's not. So why that's important is that is a self-awareness practice completely in itself, because you, Paul, but all of us have triggers based on our own childhood, the fears that we have, the things that happen to us that we don't want to have happen to our kids, or something that we haven't even recognized. Like I tend to work with a lot of women. I'm a girls and women's advocate mostly. And, so many women growing up in their family did not feel heard and then went into an educational system where they weren't heard, a work system where they weren't heard. So they run into a situation that's minor with their kids. Like, honey, can you put your shoes away? And the kid doesn't put their shoes away. And they're like, you have to listen to me, put your shoes away. And they're not really mad about the shoes. They're mad because no one's been listening to them for years. Yeah. And I have some of that, which is why I can relate to it. So you can kind of see how when people come to me and they say, my kid's doing this, my kid's doing that, my kid's doing this, of course I hear and validate and all of that's true. But why are these things bothering you? There's layers and layers, and they still should put their shoes away. But the effect it's having on you, like somebody, a family member of mine is in recovery, and in AA, they always say, if it's hysterical, it's historical, right? If you're freaking out, then there's something that in your history that is really being brought up by this situation. Like there is, I didn't mean to interrupt, but can you repeat that again? Sure. If it's hysterical, it's historical. Isn't that great? I love AA language. I really do. Like I have so many clients and, like I said, family members who have gone through recovery programs. And sometimes I'm like, I think we should all go, we should all learn this understanding of ourselves. Hopefully you can go back to your train of thought, but I'm just stuck on it. I'm like, I am like that, I'm just chewing on that and figuring out if it's hysterical, it's historical. And that's true for your kids too, Paul, is I know they haven't had as long of life, but you know how sometimes we'll say to our kid, like, hey, what's your favorite color? And they're like, why do you always need to know my favorite color? And you're like, wait a second. I just want to know your favorite color, but there's something underneath that for them. There's a feeling of judgment. There's a feeling of, you don't know me. You don't watch me. You're trying to test me. It's different for every kid, but a lot of times we're very like, instead of being curious about our reactions or our kids' reactions, we're just kind of pissed. We're like, it shouldn't be this way.
Oh my God. I could not agree with you more, because I am at my core a very curious person. Yeah. And that's why I love what I do when it comes to being a wealth advisor and, running this family office that I do, is that much of what I do is research and reading and figuring out and problem solving and getting into things that people don't want to get into or deal with.
Yes.
But when it comes to my kids, I'm not that
as
way.
Curious.
I'm not as curious.
Well, and even that is like, again, this kind of goes back to the chakras and understanding yourself. Like there's probably some deeper beliefs. Okay. So it could be so many different things here. So you just like, I'm going to throw a bunch of things out and you just pull whatever feel like resonates, because they may not all, but some of it is our belief systems about that kids should just do what we say. Right. Yeah. That we kind of grew up in.
That's how we grew
a generation where if the parent says do it, you do it. And, a lot of times when I say to parents, like, do you want your kid to be afraid of you? A lot of parents are like, oh yeah, they better be afraid of me, which isn't really great, because then they're not going to come to you. There's also these pieces of, we know that we aren't showing up in certain ways. So we don't want to be curious because our kids might tell us that. Do you see what I mean? Like we would like to perceive ourselves in a certain way. And then as soon as our kid says, well, you didn't show up for that thing, whatever it may be, we're like, but we showed up 2 weeks ago and I showed up with the money and you couldn't have gone to that camp without me. And we, instead of hearing their needs, we focus on what we believe parenting should be, which is, I'm bringing in the money. I am sending you to the good school. So you should be grateful. But see, our kid doesn't understand that aspect of life. They can't relate.
Yeah, I agree. I completely agree with you. And that's been something that I've been wrestling with personally I need to work through that, because that's a bad spot to be in.
Yeah. Yeah. And it is like, let's just call it what it is. What sucks about it, not only do we feel not good, but we disconnect from our kids, or our kids disconnect from us, or it's this mutual thing where we're just, like the phase your kids are in is a really important time. Every time is important, but they are going to be changing. And can you allow them to do that instead of, we used to go fishing at 10. Why don't you guys fish with me anymore? Because they're not 10. Like now we have to start meeting them where they're at. What music do they like? And can you listen to it with them? What shows are they watching? And can you like sit down and be like, okay, tell me about this show. Like, tell me about these people. If you are interested in their lives, they stay connected to you because they know you have their back. If you tell them why their shows suck and why their music is awful and why what they do is nothing like what you did as a kid and how they're just missing the boat, it's not that they won't love you. It's just that they're not going to be interested in spending time with you. And then you'll feel hurt. And it's the cycle, right?
You didn't realize this was turning into a therapy session, did you? This is terrific.
It always does. I mean,
this is your natural element, Cathy. Like this is incredible.
It always does. And literally, Paul, the thing that's so great is every moment of the day, not to overwhelm people with this, but every moment is a learning experience, right?
Yeah.
What's working? What's not? Oh, I said that and they were really affected by that. It may not be the right time to say, why did that affect you? But you're like taking in information. We're either taking it in and noticing, or we're denying it and deciding to just do our expectations and they have to deal with it. And that's the old school, listen to me, I don't want to listen to you parenting.
Right. Oh, God, this is so good. This is so good. I hope the audience is getting as much out of this as I am. So how I got to go back and look at my notes because I went off.
Take your time.
I went off track, but let me go to this question because it actually what we're just talking about. And my question was, has being a parent always felt overwhelming no matter what generation? And because we'll look back and, like I'll talk to my parents and like, well, you don't know what it was like for us. You had it so good. And now we're saying the same things to our kids, and, more than likely they'll say the same things to their kids, right. and on and on. But I guess the heart of my question is really, I guess, does it always feel so overwhelming?
Yes. But for different reasons. And I think that's kind of like it's like the paradoxical parts of it. Like there are things that in this generation are easier, and there are things that are definitely more difficult.
Yes.
Why that's important, and I can speak to those individual things, but why that's really important to just understand is why we're never going to have generational agreement on things. Meaning when we look at our childhood and we're like, oh, I went out at 9 a.m. I was on my bike all day. My parents didn't know where I was. And then I'd come home when the street light came on. Why don't you do that? That is not available to our children in this day and age. And part of it is a false belief. Like we really believe that our kids are going to get picked up by strangers, or that if they actually ride in the street, that means they're going to be hit by a car. Like we've become a much more worried and concerned society. Part of that, there's so many reasons for that. And it's really interesting to dive into. We could do like 2 hours about that. But one of them is the amount of news that we take in. We know so much information about what's going on in every town, in every country, in every city around the world, that we believe bad things are going to happen all the time.
Right. Because we didn't have that access.
We didn't have that access. We knew what was going on in our town and maybe a few nationwide stories that were on the front page of the paper. We didn't take in the toxicity and negativity of every single event occurring simultaneously. I mean, our bodies are not built for it. Talk about body awareness. Like we are literally not built for it. Yeah. And so it's part of the reason we feel overwhelmed is it becomes a projection onto our children. If we hear the news and then we look at them and say, okay, you can't go there. You can't do that. You can't be alone. You have to have a chaperone. You can't spend the night. And the interesting thing is why it's paradoxical. There's also some truth to that. Our kids could go to, Lollapalooza and get COVID. Right? That could happen. Mm-hmm. Our kids could be in a situation where they do get in a car accident. That could happen. It's not one or the other. It's balancing both understandings that sometimes we're a little over the top with our fear, but we also have to be wise and rational parents and recognize that there are risks, but that sometimes, like I told you, I have a 19-year-old and a 17-year-old. When they tell me, And this is the difference when your kids get older. They don't say, Mom, can I do this? They say, here's what I'm doing. And when they say that, I have to trust them because one is an adult and the other is all like in November, she'll be 18. And my job is now to support, encourage, be there if there is a challenge, offer any guidance if they ask for it. I am no longer in charge of saying you can't go. So I guess my point is the risks are real. And we also have a lot of created risks in our mind. So we have to kind of find a wise place between.
It's funny that you mentioned that because I remember being in the NICU with the triplets. Triplets were in the NICU for like 6 weeks over Christmas and New Year's. And I remember talking to one of the doctors, and she had, I think, like a 22-year-old daughter, ironically living in Chicago where you're at. And it was New Year's Eve, and she was getting updates about what her daughter was doing. And she made the comment to me. She's like, it doesn't matter what age your kids are at. You will always be parenting.
Always. Because, and if we are wise, again, I'm using the word wise just to mean like, if we're using all aspects of our brain and body, if we're pulling together all of our information, we will transition through different types of parenting. Because the way I parented, like I was just saying, you have a 10-year-old and 12-year-olds, and they will need you to be a different kind of parent as they're going forward. They don't need you to tie their shoes.
Life transitions, shot.
Right. And here's the other thing. You have to watch them to figure out what they need.
Yes.
You can't go to the book anymore. Like when they're babies, you're like, okay, they're supposed to nap at 1. They're supposed to nap at 4. And that never works anyway either. But at least we're still trying to follow a pattern because they can't speak to us yet. But once your kid says, this is what I need, or I don't want, it's as you're getting into the world of like where kids are, maybe they do a sport or maybe they do some kind of thing that you're really proud of, or you've got a community. And then one day they may come to you and say, I'm done with that.
Yeah.
And you may be like, yeah. And you're like, but that's our community. And I planned on you doing that in high school, and you were going to get a college, you were going to go to college on that scholarship. That might not be their path. That's your path that you dreamed of, but it's not theirs. And you may also be like, but can't you see how this is going to help you? And they may say, but that's not me. This gets into a lot of other issues when it comes to sexuality, when it comes to gender, when it comes to, life decisions, friendships, education, what's interesting to them. So it becomes a lot more daunting in some ways, but more connective and relational, because your kid actually their brain is now developed to a point where they can rationalize. They have that prefrontal cortex, where they can be like, Dad, I can hear you too now.
Yeah.
At 8, they can't, but now they can.
Well, Teresa made this really fascinating observation. Well, it's probably over a month ago now, and I don't remember what we were talking about or the context, but I think she was explaining to somebody, because when you say the word triplets or multiples, people like just the first thing is like gasp, like, oh my gosh, like how hard is that?
How do you do it? Right.
Yeah. And the way that she put it is when they were younger, it was more physical exertion and work. Now it has been transitioning more into more mental work and exertion, and more so anxiety.
I was going to say, like, yes, mental, but it's a lot here.
Yes.
It's a lot of, you don't have the amount of control you had before. And you really didn't have a lot of control before either. Yeah. But it felt like it, right? You were like, they're with me, I know where I'm putting them in bed. I know who they're with. I'm scheduling the play dates. And then there's this letting go where I agree. There's a lot of choices, which is the mental and the rationalizing and developing as they develop, because we have to grow up too, right? We're growing up alongside them. We're becoming more self-aware. We're recognizing our own triggers. But for me, a lot of it has been, since we're talking about my book, in the 4th chakra area, like in the heart center, like there's been a lot of joy and a lot of pain, like, and they're two sides of the same coin, because you don't know one without the other, but a lot of disappointment, a lot of fear, a lot of worry. And what you though see as they go through, and you watched this when they were little, like you even had the NICU experience where you probably every day was probably really interesting. I'll just say, like the information you got, the concern, you probably have those sounds from the hospital ingrained in your brain, right?
It's funny you mentioned that, because Teresa says that all the time. She's like, she'll never be able to get over all the monitors and the beeping noises. Like that still bothers her to her core this day, and will probably forever.
It will. And because it carries a vibe. Like I didn't have it with my kids, but my dad was sick for like 17 years before he passed. So hospitals, not only did I work in one, but I was there with my dad all the time. And so those sounds carry a feeling. Like even for a while when my phone would ring, the phone carried a feeling of this could be bad news, right? Like there's thing. And that in itself is, we can call them traumas. We can call them, post-traumatic kind of experiences, but we need to hold them with a lot of compassion. It's when people say, well, heal that. Okay, let's bring awareness, but it may just always be the way. And to just be compassionate toward that part of yourself, because you worked a lot. I mean, the amount of emotional work you did in that 6 weeks, some people can't even conceive of, that was pretty incredible. So I think that and actually I didn't know where I was going after that. I got on the hospital track, and I was like thinking about
that'll get you off track.
I know.
Pretty easy.
Well, because trauma is such it makes me want to go in a totally different direction, which we don't have to, but it's so interesting, like what our experiences have done to shaping our worldview. And I think, and this is where self-help can get negative, because I really understand that self-help has two sides. I've lived it my whole life. So it can be helpful and harmful. Is a lot of times there's just a lot of, well, don't think that way, or think differently, or let that go, or heal that. And that's not always what's supposed to happen. Like there is, those experiences shape our worldview. They develop our compassion. They make us more empathetic to others. I bet there are a lot of families, if they ever had the experience of being in the NICU, they'd know to call you guys, because they know that you could understand. So it becomes part of, it's a goodness in us too. So anyway, I just, trauma.
Let me bring back kind of like a closing question to the book.
Sure, please.
Is what would be like one or two big takeaways that parents should be taking away from the book after they read it? Or what would you really want to point out that parents should pay attention to?
It's a great question. I think the book is very similar to the podcast, in that the book is not about how to get your child to do anything. It's about how to take care of you. And that even though they're at the end of every chapter, there's all these examples of here's how to discuss this with your child. Like I give a lot of examples of how to pass along information, or to demonstrate or role model ways of dealing with difficult situations. The book is really about the parent. And the biggest compliment I've gotten about it, or, people who have read it, the reviews that I've gotten, is that I think what people take away from it is that it is a compassionate approach. There is not a judgment in here of you should be doing this, or how do you not know how to do this? We're all kind of walking this path. And sometimes we think we are headed in the right direction and we hit a wall. And sometimes the person who hits the wall is the one who finds the most wisdom a week later. There is no either got it or you don't. And so the compassionate response is, you may have been, when your kid was little, an amazing connected parent, and you're starting to feel like that's getting lost, or you don't know your kids very well. And that's okay. Meaning that's a time to go back and kind of be like, okay, what do I want? How can I become more curious? Everything is a practice. And so the whole idea of it being compassionate, and that even if you feel like there was a lot of things you missed because life was really chaotic when your kids were little, it never ends, meaning you can reconnect tomorrow. You can, I talk to a lot of grandparents who email me, especially about the show, because they listen to the show, and they'll be like, I did not do any of these things with my kids, but I'm going to do it with my grandkids. And I'm trying to do it more with my adult kids, because there is no age limit. These things that you and I are talking about are universal truths. It's true in marriage. It's true in friendship. It's true in parenting. It's about how we relate to ourselves, how we relate and understand others. And it's always a practice. Like it's ongoing.
Well, that was actually one of my last questions that I had for you was, while we have this unlimited potential for compassion and caring, it certainly goes up and down.
Yeah.
How do we go about refilling this compassion bucket, if you will? And it reminds me of this book that I used to read to my kids about this topic called How Full Is Your Bucket?
Oh, I love it. I mean,
you remember that book?
Yeah, so completely.
Yeah. And I remember reading that to my kids, and I'm like, I should dust that off. I'm sure Teresa's got it somewhere, because that was an excellent series of books.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, that in itself is about self-care, but I want to redefine that word for people, because I think, how words sometimes start to betray us because they get
and I think that's one of them.
That is, it's become too mainstream. So I try, I often more use self-compassion, but I want to talk about what self-care means. So self-care is not about getting a massage and getting your nails done. Self-care is about recognizing yourself and hearing what you need. The reason why this is the answer to your question is because, like you said, there are times when your patience is limited. There are times when you recognize you can't take anything else in. And it's not because you're failing. It's because, like you said, you are full. Like the Buddhists always talk about the empty cup, which is most people, the Zen proverb, someone shows up to a teacher with a cup and he pours the tea and he keeps pouring the tea till it's overflowing. And the student's like, why are you doing that? And he's like, because that's what you are right now. You're already full. You have no room for anything else. So I'm demonstrating through the tea that you are an overflowing cup. You have to empty. So emptying means, like, it's so funny to have this conversation because the last month, the COVID situation with everybody, my mom is not well right now. There is, things going on with work. It's been one of those months where, where you wake up and you're like, oh, another thing. Of course.
Right. Of course. Yes.
And I know, what does that mean for me? I have to go to bed at 9:30 or somewhere around there. I have to. And not because I'm trying to demonstrate to everybody my sleep habits, but I am utilizing so much energy during the day, mentally and physically. It's the only way I can do it. I also am practicing. I'm taking walks with my girls because that's the time that we're actually connecting and I'm feeling like that's happening. We're moving, we're processing. I'm asking my friends for help, like not with like bringing food, but like having sessions where I'm like, you guys, 10 minutes, like I'm freaking out. I'm overwhelmed, so someone's relating to me. So I'm paying attention to my needs. That's all self-care is. It doesn't matter how it looks. I don't care if it's exercise or not. It's not your eating habits. It's the sense of, if you feel, Paul, like on a certain day that you are very impatient, taking 3 minutes to figure out why. And you'll be like, because everybody at work is asking me for everything and I'm already filled, or I'm scared because something my kids said, or I'm feeling disconnected from my wife. And that's why I'm feeling impatient. We've been trained to not look at those things and just kind of keep going.
Keep going. Yeah. The key there is this stop.
Yes. The key there. And the stop could be like, my stopping is, I have it's literally 5 minutes. I have a journal called the 5-minute journal. I'm a big journaler. I'm a writer, but sometimes I don't have energy for the narrative. Like, I don't want to wake up and be like, today, like, I don't have that time.
Right.
So I found this thing called the 5-minute journal, and it basically just lists a few things. Today, there's a quote at the top, and then it says, today I am grateful for. There's 3 lines, and then it'll say something I want to learn today, something. And I just write words. Like, I'm not doing it for a school, project. Like, no one's going to read it. So I just write words. And what that does is it's kind of talk about, this is chakra 1, foundation, establishing my intention. And, again, it's not about what you say. I every day I say the weather, because in Chicago right now, it is amazing. So I'm just like, the fact that I can be outside. So you can put breathing, like, you don't have to like come up with brand new things. It's just, what do I appreciate today? And that at least is an intentional way of stopping and being like, or I'm going to check in with my daughter because I noticed yesterday she was really overwhelmed, and that's something I'm going to do today. So to your point, like, the stopping can be 5 minutes. It doesn't have to be today. I really need to meditate for 30 minutes. I love meditation, but I'm always careful to recommend that because I know that some people are like, oh,
yeah.
Well,
I could keep you here for probably another hour, and we're approaching the top of the hour.
No way.
So, yeah, seriously. This has just been such a amazing conversation, Cathy. And I'm sure that this is not going to be our last. So let me bring us to my closing question that I ask all of our guests, at least the first timers anyways.
Great.
Is what is the best thing about being a parent?
Oh, the relationships, because it's the one relationship where, and I know some people will say, no, this does happen sometimes, but 99% of the time, you're not going to bail. Meaning there are friendships that come and go. There are, marriages that come and go sometimes that just don't work out. But when it comes to our kids, it's the most determined and willing and vulnerable and, most love-filled place that we can be, where we're willing to do this work. It's kind of like what I said before about the secret of our podcast is that it's really not about parenting. It's about us, but the willingness of people to focus on themselves and heal or become curious comes through the love of their children. They're like, I'm willing to be a better person or to, raise my game because I love my kids so much. So it's the relationship is so, and you know what else, Paul? It's a hard relationship. Like I'm making it sound like sunshine and rainbows. It's not, but nothing in life is. I think it's the most honest, real, it's as much challenge as it is beauty, but man, do we love our kids. Don't we? I mean, They drive us crazy. We love them.
I have heard Teresa tell expecting mothers or new mothers, the phrase that she uses, "Welcome to the hardest job that you'll ever love." I think that's how she says it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's one of those things. I remember the love when I recognized after I had my first daughter, how much I loved her, because I didn't have the experience of them handing me my baby and going, I'm in love right now. Like there's a relationship building where you're like, oh my God, this person. And it's a different love. It's kind of like intense, you know what I mean? Like where you're like, oh, like you're on fire all the time, not because you're feeling so protective, and it makes me go out and be an activist in the world. Like I'm doing things for my children's future. And so yes, I agree with your wife on that one. It's the hardest thing, but you will absolutely be so fulfilled by these choices.
Well, Cathy Adams, I cannot thank you enough for being on the show. And I'm already looking forward to our next conversation.
Great. Me too.
And to have Todd on.
Yes.
So
you'll love Todd. Yeah.
Let Todd know I will be contacting him soon. But I can't thank you enough for being on the show. And we'll have all the show notes or links to Zen Parenting, the book, Zen Parenting Radio. And I think what you're doing is helping and will continue to help a whole lot of parents. So thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Thanks for inviting me today.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Emotional Balance Sheet Podcast. Please visit tamacapital.com to subscribe to this podcast or to connect with certified financial planner and registered investment advisor Paul Fenner of Tama Capital. And please join us again next time on the Emotional Balance Sheet Podcast.